We are going to finish the job we started.
The problem with the current crop of greenlit sci-fi and actioners is that they're constantly reboots and reimaginings of the exact same universes and stories. When George Lucas couldn't secure the rights to Flash Gordon in the 70s, he made a new world based on the former and created Star Wars. I don't know if you've heard of it. Now, instead of studios nurturing the next Star Wars, they just want to make more Star Wars sequels. The same can be said of other popular science fiction and fantasy movies. Both Terminator and Robocop are two 1980s movies that represent the pinnacle of hard sci-fi. James Cameron and Paul Verhoeven's movies are perfect specimens, and didn't need sequels. That of course didn't stop James Cameron doing what James Cameron does, and giving us T2, but as we all know, the more sequels you make, the more likely you'll get diminishing returns.
I'm back.
I'll be back.
Both were given mediocre reboots and rehashes in the 2010s. The studios tried to dumb them down into PG-13 actioners to appease a wider crowd, and stripped out any of the interesting themes that made them so good, as well as the gore and grit. Add to that a boatload of CGI instead of the charming practical effects that make you scream, how did they do that? And you're left with forgettable reboots that pleased pretty much no one. CGI and the artists who make them can produce incredible work, but they're often overutilised by workers who are pushed to the limit and aren't used in conjunction with practical effects like they should be. The original Terminator and Robocop shone because they didn't break the bank in terms of their budgets, but did the most they could with what they had. Enter Upgrade, writer-director Leigh Whannel's low-budget 2018 sci-fi actioner horror film starring Logan Marshall Green as a quadriplegic man given the chance to walk again through a mysterious and highly advanced artificial intelligence known as STEM. It was the first collaboration of Blumhouse and Neon, who'd made indies such as the brilliant Ingrid Goes West. Upgrade doesn't pull its punches, and in spite of being made on a budget of roughly 3 to 5 million, it's sort of an inventive combination of practical and digital effects to tell a focused story with great twists and turns. Upgrade depicts a world in which most people have resigned themselves to being dependent on machines. Its exploration of AI has only become more and more relevant in the years since its release, as debate has continued to rage on the moral concerns behind platforms like ChatGPT or the abundance of AI art. If machines learn and develop at a rate faster than us, what need is there for the human element at all? What will we lose in the process as we turn into cyborgs with more and more technology? We're already at the point where smartphones act like a second brain, constantly in our hands and delivering us a little bit of everything all of the time. The future of Upgrade doesn't seem as science fiction as first thought, which is very evocative of the conversations regarding machine intelligence and the pitfalls surrounding those moral quandaries in the Terminator and Robocop movies. Leigh Whannel and James Wan are two filmmakers and frequent collaborators that I have a lot of time for. Saw and Insidious are modern horror favourites that have permeated in the minds of audiences since they were released. Saw spawned a huge fan base, and Insidious is responsible for one of the most memorable jump scares in recent history. I've loved all of Wan's big budget fare since, and I think he manages to inject a real sense of fun into what could be really tired franchise fare in Furious 7 and Aquaman. But I think Leigh Whannel has also taken a really interesting route, one that is more rooted in low budget horror and action, reimagining science fiction tropes and ideas into fresh takes that are awe-inspiring. Upgrade and The Invisible Man are really great features made for less than 10 million, and the latter even grossed a sizable profit. And whilst the former only made about 17 million for its small theatrical run, I think it's a movie that really must be seen by any science fiction fans. Upgrade is freaking awesome.
I just need to hear you say it.
Yeah, I was.
Stem, you can take over.
Hi.
Upgrade is something to say, but it's also masterfully entertaining to boot, with stellar action, acting and a killer twist. It features some great horror elements, and the whole thing is presented in an awesome cyberpunk world, one that still floors me because it was made at a fraction of the cost of big blockbusters that don't look half as good. I'm going to break down why Upgrade is the true spiritual successor to films like Terminator and Robocop, whilst also just being a kick-ass movie in its own right that stands on its own 2 feet. But before I delve further into that, I want to talk about today's sponsor, Millernote, a free, easy to use tool to organise your ideas and projects into visual boards. Milanote exists to help people do better thinking at the early stages of the creative process. It's a flexible and unstructured workspace that lets ideas grow and evolve in whatever way makes sense to you. Making a YouTube video is next to impossible without proper, considered planning. If you're like me, you might write them, present them, and edit them from start to finish. With Milanote, I can succinctly detail every step of the way and have a localized place to visualize each key creative chunk. Also, I just like visuals. It's why this is a film channel and not a book channel, so having my plans laid out like this makes it so much more interesting to me. Starting a new project is easy, with over 100 built-in templates available for every type of creative project. Milanote makes it so easy to work with a team. By sharing a link, you can easily invite team members to the board where they can leave comments, provide feedback, and offer suggestions in real time. Milanote is free. That's right, free, with no time limit, so there's really no reason not to check it out. Sign up by using my link in the description below to start your next creative project. If you stuck around with the channel for any length of time, then you know that I like my protagonists to go through the ringer. Conflict produces character, and in an action movie, the more you can batter your main character physically and emotionally, the better. That doesn't mean it should be mean-spirited for the sake of it. This movie's opening act is nasty. It's really nasty, but every single horrible gut-wrenching moment is essential to the plot. And we get sucked into Gray's plight, we become absorbed in the drama because we feel so badly for him. The crash also highlights Gray's perspective. He is mistrustful of tech overriding the will of human beings, and he was right to feel that way, because if he could have been given control of the wheel, all of this could have potentially been prevented. He becomes a quadriplegic, no longer able to live the same life he once had, nor is he able to spend that life with the person he loves most. That same reliance on machines that everyone craves is now his crutch too. The house is designed to help him with protein shakes and medication, and it cuts to his core that he can't be left alone.
And administer PM medicine.
I'm not looking to restart my life.
Good problem. Again.
I'm looking for the off switch.
By the way, this is all in the first 20 minutes. There's not an ounce of fat on this story. I keep seeing people complaining about movies being too long, and I kind of sympathise. Not everything needs to be a 3-hour epic. Some movies do, of course, but Hollywood needs to stop thinking that it needs to compete with bingeable streaming box sets to try and hold the audience's attention in the multiplex. Upgrade clocks in at 1 hour 39 minutes, it gets going, and it never lets up. It ends exactly where it needs to, and that abbreviated runtime makes it both highly rewatchable and easy to recommend to your casual film watching buddies. Cinematographer Stefan Duccio cited the points of reference by Whannel, the original Terminator, Robocop, any Paul Verhoeven film. Stefan noted personally Rian Johnson's Looper, because it was only slightly removed from where we are now. Partly why it has that 80s sci-fi feel is because Whannel wanted the CGI to look degraded rather than really pretty and clean. The screens are always displaying quite crappy pixelated footage, and that's really charming. He preferred for the futurism to be hinted at rather than being constantly in your face, and I think that really works in the same way that it does for Looper. Whannel said he was directly inspired by Robocop and the Terminator because they were super violent and there was something really visceral about them. They had to rely on other genres like action and horror to sell the world in place of constant huge effects. Because those films didn't have huge budgets and so lent on the gore. Producer Kylie Dufran was excited by the theatrical pipeline of the film, a commitment Blumhouse makes for all their releases, and something Whannel was interested in himself, wanting to make films for the big screen. And I'm really thankful for that. Getting to see this in the cinema at Fright Fest was a real joy back in 2018. Too many brilliant indies are dumped straight to streaming without hope in hell for theatrical outside of your Prince Charles's. Dufresne was confident they could shoot in Australia because there is a wealth of Australian crew well versed in action due to Hollywood taking a fair few big budget actioners productions to the country. Chris Anderson was the stunt coordinator on this, an expert that had previously worked on the first Mad Max, Peter Jackson's King Kong and Pitch Black amongst many others. What a great get for a film made for tuppence in comparison. And the whole film was shot in just 6 weeks! 6 weeks! And in spite of that, the filmmakers used every second and every cent to achieve some truly great world building. There's loads of great ways they got around the budget. Whannel points out that the wide shot of the city is just about one of the only futuristic cityscape shots. It's then followed up by boom, a regular city shot. In the edit you don't even notice. Whannel said they had to pick and choose what would be the money shots to sell you on this cyberpunk world, and they only had a couple of studio sets like Gray's house. He owes a lot to the brilliant production designer in Felicity Abbott, who was key in realising Whannel's vision. One thing Whannel wanted to make it stand out from other futuristic movies is to have all of the tech have some connection to nature, whether that be the look or the sound. The idea of using what you have on the modest money you've accrued is summed up by the bolt gun that Fisk uses on Gray. As pointed out in the commentary by Whannel, that is actually a repurposed Nintendo Duck Hunt gun, and that's kind of amazing. It's not the kind of thing you'd notice unless someone points it out, and that is the quintessential magic of the movies. But the Duck Hunt gun is also a crucial piece of the puzzle, one that is satisfyingly laid out. We don't see the gun Fisk uses to kill Asher, but we do see the Duck Hunt gun being used on Gray. Later, we're shown that Fisk didn't use a handgun, he in fact used a handgun. Handgun? Handgun? Julia Roberts. Julia Rob Hurts. Jesus died for our Cynthias. Jesus cried for our Cynthias.
I'm not proud of that.
Sorry, anyway. What's not readily apparent is why did Fisk use his built-in handgun on Asher, but the Duck Hunt gun on Gray? And that's when we finally learn that it isn't a gun at all.
When I shot you in the neck, did you think that was a gun? It was a medical tool, like they use for bovine.
And now suddenly the mystery shifts from why did someone want to kill Asher to why did someone want Gray? In addition to the Verhoeven, Cameron, Cronenberg and even Carpenter stylings, Whannel cited noir as a genre he really wanted to evoke. He said he wanted a gritty urban noir feel, which he felt was appropriately captured by Melbourne as the filming location, of course doubling for America in the finished product. David Cronenberg's subject matter really appeals to Whannel. Like Cronenberg, he certainly delves into rich science fiction ideas through the lens of a lean, highly entertaining horror film. There's more than a little bit of The Fly here, in that both protagonists go through what are ultimately tragic parables about the misuse of technology. Whannel cites that he's very nostalgic about films like Scanners, Videodrome, The Thing, and many more 80s sci-fi classics, and he wanted Upgrade to cradle the spirit of those movies through doing what you can do within the confines of budget and scope of what's available. I think someone like J.J. Abrams goes wrong because he also wants to cradle the nostalgia of the things he grew up with, but he's only interested in aping the style and feel of what came before. Whannel is a filmmaker that uses those inspirations to push towards new ideas and new responses in the audience. Whannel loves the theatrical experience, and that's how he wanted his films to be experienced. He's also worried about cinemas going the way of the dodo, which is a sentiment I share. One last tiny point to touch on about the world building, which I think is fun. The company from Upgrade, Cobalt, is featured in The Invisible Man. I love the idea that these films are set in the same universe, but crucially, I love that that's just the world. Like the connections between Alien and Blade Runner. It's an implied shared world in both cases, but we don't need to see a crossover because that would be fruitless. It's just fun to imagine that maybe Upgrade is in the future world of 2020's The Invisible Man. Benedict Hardy's Fisk is such a deliciously creepy and blood-curdling villain. You hate his guts from the moment he murders Asher, and he's just a wholly unredeemable, nasty antagonist who delights in causing people pain and misery. In Terminator and Terminator 2, the good guys are always facing an evil Terminator that far surpasses them in pretty much every conceivable way. Well, that's flipped here. If anything, Gray and Stem take the place of the sleeker T-1000, and Fisk is the obsolete burly T-800. In the context of Upgrade, it totally works. Not only do these T-800s outnumber Gray, their cyborg enhancements are much more aggressive and far less subtle. They all have guns implanted directly into their forearms, which they can load and then fire at will. It's insanely cool.
I gave you a gift. I inducted you into my race.
The fascistic white supremacy undertones to Fisk make him even more insipid. Likening all those with cybernetic enhancements as better, akin to a master race, his characterisation is in apt juxtaposition to Gray, who believes that human beings have key traits which separate them from machines and make them still wholly important to the world.
Drive anything, talk to anything, calculate anything.
Can I make babies and play football?
Gray believes people have the right to exist because they can love and create and feel, whereas Fisk sees those things as weakness, believing only the strongest deserve to live.
Let my superiority over your kind be the last thought that crosses through your mind before machines chew it up.
Whannel wanted Fisk to have a neo-Nazi look to him and described him as a racist of the future, part of a group of people that don't categorise between skin colour, but whether or not you're upgraded. Upgrade's physical foes have the edge in their numbers and their unrelenting lack of morality. Where they best Gray and Stem through their offensive capabilities, the leading duo best them because they work so well together.
Do something, Gray.
Wait, Fisk Brantner. Cirque Brantner. Was your brother. Cause he wailed like a little baby.
In a climactic moment, Gray reminds the audience that machines can't be relied upon for everything. He uses Fisk's emotions against him, and in doing so gains the upper hand just long enough to blow his brains out. There's loads of cool ways Stem and Gray interact, and the ways he helps with his body.
Okay, just give me a second, okay?
1 second has passed.
Look, I didn't mean a second, I just mean hold on, okay?
Simon Madden's voice work as Stem is fantastic. His cool and calm demeanour evokes the glory days of Paul Bettany's polite and astute Jarvis. He's really likeable and, this is key, trustworthy because of his enticing delivery. Whannel wanted the interaction between Gray and Stem to feel like two actors rather than a post-dub. So he actually had Simon Maiden on set communicating with Logan Marshall Green through an earpiece. They're having a real interaction. The interaction between Gray and Stem is fantastic. Gray often asks emotionally driven questions or makes comments that human beings would naturally do, and Stem will often calmly deliver answers in a way only a hyper-intelligent machine could. A couple of highlights include Stem helping Gray to lie to Detective Cortez.
Did you hear anything about that?
Don't look away. You're showing her you're lying.
Or when Stem assures Gray that they can indeed get rid of any trace of Gray Trace. I'm sorry.
Are you kidding me? I can't remember every single thing that I touched.
I have a record of every single thing you touched.
The Terminators and Robocop always move in quite a stiff robotic manner, which totally worked for the 80s and 90s. In my mind, Robocop could always break out a sprint, he just chooses not to. Otherwise, he's kind of at a huge disadvantage, just hopping away. But for 2018, it made sense to overhaul how a cyborg entity would feel and move. In an interview with the New York Post, Marshall Green explained that we realised quickly the thing we did not want was robotic. We felt that a supercomputer would be efficient, and efficiency meant very neutral, yet sharp. The actor actually based his movements on Zenyatta from Overwatch, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name right. Perhaps as a homage to those earlier robot classics, Gray does move a little like a standard cyborg in the final scene, perhaps to show that Stem is gaining the upper hand. But we'll get to that. I personally love the trope of doing a dynamic duo with only one body, and we've gotten it a lot over the last 15 years. The most notable that comes to mind is of course Iron Man, but I think the one that springs to mind the most with Upgrade is Venom. It was actually released the same year as Upgrade, and it's funny because Logan Marshall Green often gets mistaken for Tom Hardy. They do look very similar in fairness. Leigh Whannel actually commented on it at his Fright Fest Q&A. It was of course a coincidence that Venom was releasing around the same time with the two projects developed concurrently. Not to shit on the latter, but Upgrade definitely does it with way more pizzazz and comes equipped with a very satisfying R rating to boot.
Stop him!
Anyway, speaking of not Tom Hardy, one screening of Upgrade and you'll never want to unironically call Logan Marshall Green Tom Hardy's lookalike ever again. You might have seen this guy in movies like Spider-Man Homecoming and Prometheus, but you've never seen him quite like this.
Charlie, don't be an idiot.
Hey, don't be a skeptic.
What the hell are you banging on about? You're meant to be a scientist, and you're telling people to squash their skepticism as you take off your helmet in an untested alien world. I love Ridley Scott, but man did he do this guy so dirty in Prometheus. His character was so thoroughly unlikable, one of those characters that gets a horrible fate, but you're kind of secretly into it because he's so freaking annoying. To be honest, that goes for a lot of characters in Prometheus, played by otherwise brilliant actors.
I like rocks. I love rocks.
But after Upgrade, I completely 180'd on Logan Marshall Green and what I came to expect from him. He's a dishy lead that's effortlessly charming, and he really owns the movie and owns the role. To gain that aforementioned cyborg movement, Marshall Green worked with former Cirque du Soleil performer Daryl Inkster for a month before filming began. Marshall Green had to concentrate on not slouching and performing what they felt would be the most efficient movements for a calculated artificial intelligence to perform. Marshall Green said that he loved the idea of kind of flowing like water, yet retaining a thrust, if you will. I can't imagine anyone else in the role, honestly. It was his turn as Grey in Upgrade that led me to seeking out The Invitation, another movie where Logan Marshall Green plays an incredibly tortured soul. If you haven't seen that film, I would also highly recommend it. We now actually thought of Marshall Green for this because of his turn in The Invitation, so we wouldn't have even had this movie quite the way it is without it. I've seen some people say the action is hard to follow, but I saw it on a huge screen the first time and at home since, and I have to really disagree there. In spite of the frenetic choreography and abundance of cuts, the characters are always well framed, favouring wider shots that capture all of their movements. And then there's a key rule that was brought to all of the action that I think makes it all very easy to understand and wholly unique. Stunt choreographer Chris Weir said they brought in everything from Jackie Chan to John Wick, and with the Matrix in between. And at this point, on top of the mentions of Robocop, Scanners, Videodrome, The Thing, The Terminator and The Fly, I feel like this movie was a fevered dream designed to tap into the pleasure centres of my brain because my god, you're mentioning all of the coolest freaking sci-fi action ever. Weir said the key principle was, how could a computer fight? The name of the game was efficiency. Whannel cited the Raid and Ong Bak as inspiration for the fighting style. They photographed their fights in a simple way. What's exciting is what's happening in the frame. So you're mixing 80s hard sci-fi with Raid style fight choreography? The sci-fi isn't the only thing that's hard right now, god damn. Remember what I said earlier about Terminator and Robocop having those how did they do that style effects? Well, the awesome effect of tracking Grey's STEM enhanced movements was achieved by linking up an iPhone on his person to the camera rig, meaning it would go wherever he did. The fact that it was computers fighting each other gave me the opportunity to do something a little bit different. We had the stunt coordinator training the actors in kind of a stilted, very clipped fighting style. Then on top of that, we decided to use this camera technique where we actually locked the camera to the actor. It's a very simple technique actually. We just strapped a phone to Logan under his clothes and the camera would kind of lock to the phone, so wherever he moved, the camera moved with him. That cinematography trick, coupled with some fantastic choreography and sound design, accentuating the machine coursing through Grey's body, makes for some absolutely blistering action.
Let me show you how it's done.
Just watching Grey flip, sprint and leap is exhilarating, and that's before we even get to the arse kicking, which often sees him taking on multiple opponents at once with robotic surgical precision. The fights are often short but punctuated with some gnarly kills, which makes sense for a machine that finds the quickest way to dispatch a foe without any regard for their lives. One detail I really love is that you can see in the choreography that STEM works from the neck down. When Grey first allows STEM to fight with his own body, we witness Grey's hand turning his own head to dodge an incoming attack. Since STEM works from the neck down, it cannot slip the punch, and instead has to use an available limb to dodge it instead. The attention to detail in these fight scenes is masterful, and it's that kind of attention to detail that produces such a wonderful sense of awe in the viewer. Computer generated effects have come an awful long way, and I never want to do the artists that create those effects dirty, but the problem is that no matter how good an effect looks, the audience immediately understands that it was made in a computer. This kind of planning and forethought going into the choreography is the kind of effect that you get from older movies, where you know what you're looking at is real, and you're both baffled and awed by the fact that the filmmakers pulled it off. The fight coordinators were brought in early and had a good amount of time to film them. Stefan took on board a lot of the stunt team's shot ideas and noted that he'd never had that much feedback for action before shooting. It allowed the fights to be covered with much more finesse than a lot of movies that don't have enough time on set and communication between the stunt team and the DOP. We tried to give every chapter unique lighting design. We went with what looked cool. It's orange in the Cirque fight, purple tones in the bathroom fight and Old Bones, lots of blue and red neon throughout, and I love that. I love that the lighting isn't naturalistic because again, it's like 80s sci-fi movies, worlds that don't have to look like our worlds. It's a constructed fantasy. This was shot on an Arri Alexa, but old Panavision anamorphic lenses from the 70s were used in order to get more of a grounded 80s look. Editor Andy Canny said that there's no full scenes deleted in the final cut because Whannell's script was so meticulous and tight, with no sequences that were ultimately superfluous. You hear a lot about big budget action movies starting off with 4-hour cuts and everyone loses their minds, but the first cut of Upgrade was only just over 2 hours. When you don't have the money to recreate the film with reshoots and editing, you have to be more concise with your filmmaking, and it really shows in the final product. This might seem like an outlier to the rest of the movie, but Upgrade is surprisingly quite funny in places. First off, after the absolutely harrowing first act, we see some levity in watching Gray become accustomed to the AI using his body to fight.
Oh, God, dear!
Marshall Green plays it perfectly, like a horrified disembodied head who's along for the ride. And then Gray has a lot of fun with this new paradigm.
Stem, you can take over.
Hi.
Subvert my operating system.
What kind of fucking language are you speaking?
It's so awesome seeing Gray use his alter ego, essentially pretending he can't walk or fight to lull the next suspect into thinking he has complete control until the last possible second. Which is exactly what Stem does to him, but more on that in a bit.
So you thought I was an invalid, but you didn't know that I'm a fucking ninja.
Easily one of the most quotable moments of the movie, and it's just so satisfying seeing Gray get muggy to Tolan after he was so steadfast in torturing him and seeing him as a non-threat. Then we're treated to Stem's robotic lack of humour.
While I am state-of-the-art, Gray, I am not a ninja.
The guy shouting Faker, actually a personal friend of Whannell,
Keep an eye on her, would you, buddy?
Faker.
and then getting up and stealing the chair is contender for best gag of the movie. The movie is really dark and presents the audience with juicy concepts, but it's not afraid to have fun and get a laugh out of you.
Let me show you how it's done. Oh, I didn't forget about you.
Crucially, the humour is never at the expense of the drama. No joke undercuts a key moment, the gags come from the situations that call for it. Why am I mentioning the humour? Well, I think the humour in the movie is key to setting up the killer ending. Upgrade really suckers you in. You begin to love the bond between Gray and Stem, it's a buddy cop actioner, and you love this pairing. You end up trusting technology just like everyone else in this world, you end up trusting Stem exactly like Gray does. So in the end, you feel like such a freaking idiot for being unable to see what was really going on. The ending reminds you that no, this is not a world where good guys team up, crack wise, and save the day. This is a world where the hero places far too much trust in technology, much like we do, and in turn Gray surrenders his freedoms in a blind attempt to get what he wants most. The twist that Stem orchestrated the events of the entire movie is so good. I love that Gray being a technophobe is exactly what placed him in Stem's crosshairs, and that the AI used the death of his wife to begin a journey of full bodily autonomy. Aaron Keane is just as much of a puppet as Gray is, forced into helping the AI he created to kill him and anyone who oppose it. In spite of Gray saying he doesn't want Stem to kill people anymore, he does so anyway.
Please, Gray.
No, don't. Please. No.
Because Stem does not attempt to learn the value of human life whatsoever. He is in stark contrast to the T2T800 who accepts John's wish to not terminate, and in the process finds out why we cry, even if it is something he can never do. Oh. But Stem does understand human beings far more than it lets on.
Ask him what his wife would want.
What would she want?
It knows that it can gain Gray's trust by helping him find the men who killed his wife, and every time he helps, he gains a little bit more control. Crucially, Stem gains permission from Gray during moments of urgency. He gains access to use his body when he is being beaten by Cirque, and he convinces him to free Stem of Aaron's shutdown protocols by telling him they only have 10 minutes or he will go back to being a quadriplegic and he won't be able to find the people that killed his wife. Where Robocop tells a tale of Alex Murphy regaining his identity in spite of his new cyborg self, Upgrade sees Gray dissolve completely. The machine takes over and he is left to live out the remainder of his consciousness in the metaphysical prison the artificial intelligence has built for him. But is it a completely unhappy ending? Whannell doesn't necessarily think so. To me, the twist in the story isn't that Stem planned this all along. To me, the twist in the story is that Gray ends up sort of in the place that he wanted to be. It's just not a real place. He has a point, of course. All Gray really wanted was what he had before, to be with his wife and for things to return to some sense of normality. He gets it, in a very Cypher from the Matrix way. If his new status quo is indistinguishable from the real world, and his wife is alive in this subconscious one, then what difference does it make to our hero? Whannel would go on to elaborate, even stating that he never saw it as a revenge movie, but is happy for people to interpret it that way. I feel like a lot of the reviews have misconstrued it as a revenge movie. Movies are an interesting beast because you work on them, you make them, and then you release them. There's a quote about how you never really finish your movie, you abandon it. So it goes out into the world like a little dove that you've let out of its cage, and the world decides what the movie is. Sometimes that viewpoint lines up with yours, and other times it doesn't. It's a really interesting and enlightening process. I didn't think I'd made that movie, but clearly I have. I see a lot of reviews talking about Upgrade as a revenge movie, and that's really surprising because I didn't set out to make a revenge movie. I didn't think I'd made a revenge movie at all. The revenge movie aspect of it is so small. It's just the device of his wife dying, and I wanted to sprinkle that in, but I really wanted to wrap the movie in a completely different skeleton than a revenge movie, which is you find out it's not about him seeking revenge for his wife. The movie is not about that at all. It's always been about two people fighting for control of the same body. Someone fighting for control of their own body with a computer. Yes, it may be omniscient at times to get these people, but that's not what the movie is about. But I keep seeing that phrase, a sci-fi revenge thriller. I'm not bemoaning it, because one of the great and wonderful things about making a movie is that it's open to interpretation. You can't really tell anybody that they're wrong. If a Bruce Springsteen fan goes, I love this song, I love how the meaning is against corporate interests, I think it would be wrong of Bruce Springsteen to say, that's not what the song is about at all. So I'm not going to say people are wrong to call it a revenge movie, but it's certainly not what I intended.
Why someone would choose to live in a fake world, I will never understand.
There's some nice foreshadowing of Gray's fate and his own acceptance of it. Gray would do the same as them, only his standards for a false reality are much higher, he just doesn't realise it yet.
The fake world is a lot less painful than
The real one. All I needed was for his mind to break.
Also, since we're here, James Wan cameo.
I printed a pizza.
STEM is psychologically preparing Gray for the new reality he will trap him in throughout the movie, making him feel like he can never move past the death of his wife and sending him rushing to any chance of being with her.
Bad dream.
No, this wasn't a dream.
Whannel said that STEM wanted a desperate person to do exactly what he says.
I am the one controlling your limbs, not you. I no longer need your permission to act.
You thought it was a cool, quippy Venom Iron Man style team-up movie between man and intelligence, but really Gray was a meat puppet the whole time, slowly but surely being tricked into being the perfect host for STEM. A neat final touch, STEM licks his own bloodied finger akin to how Gray does it at the start. STEM is finally discovering what it's like to be a real-bodied entity, something ironically closer to human than he's been the whole time. This movie was made for tuppence in filmmaking terms, a microscopic 3 to 5 million. When you think about all the cast and crew that were paid for their work, the scope and scale of the story, and the finesse with which it renders cool sci-fi concepts, that is nothing short of staggering. It is more of a spiritual successor to the first Terminator than any of the franchise's sequels for its budget alone. I mentioned previously in my Starship Troopers video that you can't sequelize the conclusion to Paul Verhoeven's loose sci-fi trilogy about authoritarian politics and identity. Well, it would be easier to sequelize the first part of that trilogy in 1987's Robocop, but you still shouldn't really try to, and it definitely shouldn't be rebooted either. No, the best way to keep the spirit of films like Terminator and Robocop alive is to create new stories that are inspired by them. Let those eras pass on. New worlds that evoke the feelings of those old ones without being derivative, but instead mining something fresh. With a whole new universe, you can take your stories and characters wherever you want, rather than being hogtied by people's expectations of what a long-running series must be. But of course, T2 is one of the best sequels of all time, so that doesn't mean that you you can't get a good couple of movies from a good idea with passion and talent in front of and behind the camera. Upgrade is getting a sequel TV series, or at least it will if Jason Blum gets his way. He stated in the past that he thinks the movie should have garnered more success and thinks there's still a lot more story to mine from that world. Would follow police detectives given STEM upgrades to help them solve crimes. With Whannel involved and the passionate Blumhouse, I'm sure if it comes to fruition, it will be really awesome. And if it helps to lead people back to the original film, then to my mind it will be more than worth it. Personally, I would love to see Gray's story continue. I love the ending of the first movie and would be satiated if we never saw him again. The twist is great and I love that it goes full horror. But my mind also can't help but wonder where things would go if we T2'd Upgrade. I'd love to see a hypothetical sequel explore two things: Gray and Asher trapped inside a reality they don't know is a forgery, and STEM Gray in the outside world effectively establishing a new world order. We pick up years later with Gray and Asher living an idyllic life, the one they both dreamed of. But nagging at the back of Gray's mind are haunting visions of Asher dying in a fatal car crash and the inescapable idea that deep down, he is a killer. The more he chooses to bury these visions, the more the cracks in the world begin to show. Strange occurrences keep mounting, and it begins to feel like the whole world around them is only there to keep them both sedated. Meanwhile, we follow a concurrent plot with STEM in the real world, in Gray's body, coming to grips with the world and what to do next. It would be no challenge for STEM to gain economic and political power or outthink the world's intelligence operations, and that's exactly what it plans to do. He's limitlessing! One half of the movie would be the Matrix/Inception, with Gray slowly realising the life he and Asher have built is based on a fabrication, and whether or not that truly matters if it means he can stay with his wife and be happy. Does it matter what happens in the outside world? Does it matter what STEM does with his own body if he can be happy in return? Or can he fight him within his own mind and break free before STEM destroys everything? Or, the harsher truth, is STEM fixing the world? Are human beings so self-destructive that they need someone to come in and take care of them? A program like STEM is necessary to shepherd us from total annihilation. And can STEM even stay true to its logical and cold perspective the more it learns living in total freedom? Logan Marshall Green could take on a dual role as the trapped Gray Trace and the physical STEM in the real world. Asher could become a fully fledged character and we could see more of that relationship between them. I'm spitballing here and it will never happen, so I'm just having some fun. But hey, if I had seen the Terminator in 1984, I would have definitely been against a sequel, and look how that turned out. By the same token, look how all those Robocop and Starship Troopers movies turned out. It's okay to leave things alone. Upgrade is the best Terminator movie since 1991, and the best Robocop movie since 1987. But most importantly, it's just an awesome science fiction movie in its own right. One that doesn't require you to have seen those movies, but enriches the experience for those that have loved these classics for many years. This film is a truly underrated movie. Not a movie that film Twitter claims is overrated, but is actually some kind of widely praised superhero movie that everyone has heard of, made on a huge budget by a well-known studio. This was actually made for nothing, squeezed every penny out of its budget, is incredibly cine-literate, and the result is an epic, unrelenting thrill ride that dances on the shoulders of science fiction movie canon. I love Upgrade, and I can't wait to see what Whannel does next. Green Hornet and Kato or the Wolfman, here we fucking come. A big thank you to my full fat tier patron, Dr. Chike, and Nathan Shaw. If you'd like to donate money to my Patreon, you can find me at patreon.com/fullfatvideos. If you'd like to find me on Instagram, you can find me at full_fat_videos. And if you'd like to find me on Twitter, you can find me at fullfatvideos.